In a Texas courtroom, a decorated officer of the law thought he was untouchable. He had the system, the years, and the confidence of someone who had always been believed. Across from him stood a young black teenage girl no one took seriously. The room expected her to falter. Instead, they witnessed something unforgettable. This isn't just about one case. It's about every time someone has been underestimated, every moment when silence was forced on a voice that deserved to be heard. And it's about what happens when that voice finally speaks. Stay with us, because the way this courtroom battle unfolds will leave you breathless, and it proves why we must never judge anyone by appearances. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and let the story unfold. Amara Lewis didn't look like someone destined for a courtroom. She was born in a neighborhood where sirens filled the night more often than lullabies, where cracked sidewalks told stories of generations who had walked them, carrying both pride and pain. Her mother worked double shifts at a nursing home, her father driving trucks across state lines, sometimes gone for weeks. Money was never steady, but love was. From the very beginning, Amara noticed things other kids her age didn't. She noticed how her teachers lowered their voices when speaking to her parents, as if pity was a language only whispered. She noticed how store clerks followed her mother down aisles, pretending to straighten shelves while their eyes clung to her every move. She noticed how the world seemed to expect less of them, less success, less opportunity, less dignity. At 10 years old, she asked her mother, "Why do they look at us like that?" Her mother sighed, wiping her tired hands on her uniform. "Because, baby, they think they know us before we even open our mouths. But we're going to show them different. One day, you'll show them." Those words stuck. By middle school, Amara was a quiet observer, the kind of student who rarely raised her hand but always had the right answer scribbled in the margins of her notebook. She wasn't flashy, she wasn't loud, but her mind was sharp, and she carried a secret determination that few saw coming. So, the turning point came when she was 14. One summer afternoon, she walked home from the library, her backpack heavy with borrowed books. Two police officers stopped her, their car pulling up fast with lights that weren't even needed. "Where you headed?" one asked, his tone more accusation than curiosity. "Home," she replied softly. They asked for ID. She didn't have one. She was 14. They didn't believe her. They searched her bag, dumping books on the sidewalk. To them, a black teenager with a heavy backpack looked suspicious. It was the first time she felt her throat burn, not from fear, but from injustice. She wanted to scream, to argue, to demand they see her as more than a suspect. But she was 14, and they didn't listen. When she finally made it home, books dirtied and crumpled, her mother's eyes filled with tears. "This is why you have to be stronger, Amara. Smarter. They'll never expect you to fight back the right way." That night, Amara decided, she would learn the rules of the game, the laws, the policies, the systems that people in power use like armor. If they didn't want to listen to her voice, she would make them listen to her knowledge. By high school, she was devouring books on history, politics, and criminal justice. While her classmates were memorizing pop songs, she was memorizing court rulings. But every step forward came with reminders of how the world saw her. Teachers praised her intelligence, but warned her not to aim too high. Guidance counselors suggested trade school instead of college. Even friends laughed when she said she wanted to be a lawyer. "You? A lawyer? You're too quiet, too young. Nobody's going to take you seriously." Each doubt became fuel. Amara Lewis carried doubt like a shadow. Everywhere she went, someone was ready to remind her of her limits. Her high school guidance counselor, a woman who smiled more out of formality than belief, once called her into the office. "Amara, you're bright," she began, tapping a pen against a stack of college brochures, "but law school is ambitious. Maybe you should consider something more practical." Practical. That word burned. It meant less than. It meant you don't belong in those spaces. Amara smiled politely, but inside she made another silent promise. Every time someone underestimated her, she would prove them wrong. By the time she graduated, she had a scholarship letter in her hand and tears in her mother's eyes. College wasn't just a dream, it was a door cracked open. But walking through it wouldn't be easy. At university, Amara was one of the few black women in her political science classes. Professors often overlooked her, calling on louder voices in the room, even when her hand was raised. Study groups formed without her. Invitations were rarely extended. But isolation became her training ground. She spent nights in the library, highlighters staining her fingertips, case law becoming her second language. While others crammed for midterms, Amara studied courtroom transcripts, fascinated by the rhythm of cross-examinations and the way a single well-placed question could unravel a lie. Money was tight. She worked in the campus cafeteria, scrubbing trays until her hands were raw, then clocked out to write essays under flickering dorm lights. Sometimes she sent part of her paycheck home to help her mother cover bills. There were moments of exhaustion so deep she questioned if it was worth it. But then she remembered the officer who laughed while tossing her library books onto the ground years earlier. That memory became her fuel. When Amara entered law school at 19, a year earlier than most, the whispers followed her. She's too young. She won't last the semester. She only got in because they're trying to look diverse. The words stung, but they also sharpened her resolve. Law school wasn't just difficult, it was designed to break people. Professors grilled students relentlessly, demanding answers under pressure. Some students cracked. Amara refused to. She spoke softly, but her answers carried weight. The more they doubted her, the more precise she became. By her second year, even professors who had dismissed her began to take notice. One mentor, Professor Daniels, pulled her aside after class. "You don't fight with volume," he said. "You fight with precision. That's rarer than you think. Don't lose it." It was the first time an authority figure told her she belonged. Most law students spent their early years shadowing attorneys, taking notes in the background. But Amara was different. She volunteered for the smallest cases, pro bono work no one else wanted, tenant disputes, petty misdemeanors, clients who couldn't pay. She wasn't after glory, she was after experience. It was one of these volunteer opportunities that led her to the courtroom where everything would change. A civil rights organization reached out to her school, looking for students willing to assist in a misconduct case. A police officer with over 2 decades on the force stood accused of abusing his authority. No big-name lawyer wanted the hassle. It wasn't lucrative, and the odds of winning were slim. Amara raised her hand. When she told her peers, they laughed. "You? Going up against a cop with 20 years in the system? He'll eat you alive." Amara didn't respond. She simply gathered her notes, researched until dawn, and prepared with the same quiet determination that had carried her this far. Because she knew this wasn't just another case. This was the kind of fight she had been preparing for her entire life. And so, on a humid morning in Texas, Amara Lewis walked into a courtroom wearing sneakers and a blazer, too big for her shoulders. To most, she looked out of place. To the officer, she looked like an inconvenience at best, a joke at worst. But beneath the oversized sleeves and quiet demeanor, Amara carried something far heavier than anyone realized. Not just her case files, not just the weight of her client's hope. She carried every doubt, every dismissal, every laugh she had ever endured, and she was ready to turn it all into fire. The officer didn't know it yet. The courtroom didn't know it yet. But they were about to witness something unforgettable. The man Amara was preparing to face wasn't just any officer. He was a 20-year veteran, the kind of figure who walked into a room and expected people to step aside. His name was Sergeant William Kearns, though in his circles he was known simply as Sarge. For 2 decades, Sarge wore his uniform like armor. Medals glinted on his chest. Commendations filled his office wall. To the public, he was the picture of loyalty and service. But behind that polished surface lay a different story. Over the years, whispers followed him. Reports of excessive force, complaints about intimidation, claims of targeting young black men during routine stops. Each one, however, was buried under paperwork, lost in insufficient evidence, or explained away by colleagues who closed ranks around him. Sarge knew the system, and he knew how to survive inside it. The case that brought him to court started like so many others, a traffic stop. A black teenager, Malik Johnson, was driving home from his after-school job at a grocery store. He wasn't speeding. His taillights worked fine. But he was young, black, and driving an older car in a neighborhood where Sarge often patrolled. The stop escalated quickly. Words were exchanged. Within minutes, Malik was pulled from the vehicle, handcuffed, and accused of resisting arrest. Witnesses recorded part of it on their phones. The footage showed Sarge shoving the boy against the hood, his voice laced with anger. Malik's mother later said her son cried that night not from the bruises, but from the humiliation. The community had seen enough. Activists rallied, demanding accountability. The case reached the desk of a civil rights organization, which finally managed to push it into court. And that's how the decorated officer, used to being shielded, suddenly found himself at the defense table. But if Sarge was worried, he didn't show it. On the first day of proceedings, he arrived in his pressed uniform, medals displayed like trophies. He shook hands with court officers, joked with clerks, and winked at old colleagues in the gallery. To him, this was just another performance. "I've been doing this job longer than she's been alive," he muttered to a fellow officer, nodding toward the empty seat where Amara would soon sit. "If they think some student lawyer is going to rattle me, they've lost their minds." That arrogance spread. Even the judge seemed weary, already bracing for what felt like a routine case, another officer with another complaint that would likely dissolve under a procedure. Back in her tiny apartment, Amara prepared. Stacks of legal pads lined her desk, sticky notes covering the walls like puzzle pieces. Every free moment she had went into studying transcripts, reviewing body cam footage, memorizing statutes. She wasn't supposed to lead this case. Initially, she was only supposed to assist a senior attorney from the civil rights group. But days before trial, that attorney was pulled onto another case in a different city. Amara, the organization's director, had said over the phone, voice hesitant, "We know you're young. We know this isn't what you expected, but right now you're the only one who's prepared enough to move forward." She could have said no. She could have admitted fear. But instead, she felt a quiet fire rise inside her. "I'll take it," she said. And so, the stage was set. A decorated officer, smug with confidence, and a 19-year-old black law student turned attorney, ready to prove herself in the most public way possible. The world inside that courtroom didn't know it yet, but they were about to witness more than a legal battle. They were about to witness the collision of arrogance and preparation, of prejudice and truth. And once again, laughter would be the first weapon drawn. The morning of the trial, Amara stood in front of her mirror staring at the reflection that stared back like a stranger. The blazer she wore hung loose, borrowed from a cousin who had insisted, "You need to look the part, even if the sleeves swallow you." The shoes pinched slightly, a thrift store find polished until they shone. She adjusted her collar, not out of vanity, but to quiet the storm in her chest. 19 years old, stepping into a courtroom where every eye would measure her worth before she spoke a single word. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. "They'll never expect you to fight back the right way." She grabbed her case files, heavy enough to anchor her trembling hands, and walked out the door. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and old paper, a place where power was stitched into every corner. Spectators filled the benches. Some curious, some skeptical, some just passing time. When Amara walked through the doors, the shift in the room was immediate. Heads turned, whispers started. "Who is she? She looks like a student. She can't be the lawyer." Even the bailiff blinked twice before asking, You're here for?" Amara met his stare. "Plaintiff's counsel." The words left her lips steady, though her pulse raced. The bailiff smirked, shook his head slightly, and gestured her inside. At the defense table, Sergeant Kearns sat with a posture that dripped authority. His uniform was immaculate, his medals polished bright enough to catch the courtroom lights. He didn't rise when Amara entered. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, eyes scanning her from head to toe. Then came the sound Amara knew too well. A laugh. It wasn't loud, but it carried sharp, dismissive, cutting through the air like a blade. A few others chuckled with him, unsure if they were laughing at her or laughing because he did. "Is this a joke?" he muttered to his attorney, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "They're really letting her run this?" The defense attorney smirked, but didn't reply. Amara felt the heat rise, but she didn't flinch. She simply placed her files on the table, opened her notebook, and began to prepare her space. Every movement deliberate, every gesture controlled. She would not give him the satisfaction of reaction. When the judge entered, even his glance lingered on Amara longer than expected. His brow furrowed, as though silently asking, "Are you supposed to be here?" The formalities began. The court clerk called the case. Amara stood, her voice calm and steady, as she introduced herself on record. "Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Amara Lewis, representing the plaintiff." Her words hung in the air. A murmur rippled through the gallery. The officer's smirk deepened. The judge adjusted his glasses, nodded stiffly, and turned his attention forward, but the doubt in his eyes had already spoken volumes. As both sides prepared for opening statements, the silence pressed heavy. Every glance, every whisper seemed to circle around Amara. She could almost hear the unspoken thoughts. Too young, too green, too black, too out of place. But Amara had learned long ago that silence can be a weapon. She let them think what they wanted. She let them laugh, let them doubt, let them underestimate. Because she knew once the words began, once the evidence unfolded, the same mouths that whispered would fall quiet. The bailiff called the court to order. The trial was about to begin. And while Sergeant Kearns sat back with the ease of a man who had won before he even started, Amara leaned forward, pen in hand, ready to strike where no one expected. The courtroom settled, though the tension in the air was alive, almost electric. "Opening statements," the judge announced. The defense rose first. A seasoned attorney with silver hair and an easy smile adjusted his tie, nodded respectfully to the judge, and began. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen, this case is simple." His voice carried authority, years of practice molding each syllable. "Sergeant Kearns has served this community faithfully for over 2 decades. He has saved lives, stopped crimes, and protected families. On the night in question, he was simply doing his job, a difficult job that requires quick judgment in dangerous situations." He gestured toward Kearns, who nodded solemnly, medals glinting under the lights. "My client followed procedure. He acted responsibly. Any claims otherwise are misunderstandings, fueled by incomplete videos and misplaced outrage. At the end of this trial, you will see Sergeant Kearns for what he is, a dedicated officer unfairly accused." The attorney sat down with the ease of a man who believed the case was already won. Kearns leaned back, smug, his arms folded like a king watching a kingdom bow. Then came Amara's moment. She stood slowly, adjusting papers that didn't need adjusting, giving herself one heartbeat, then another. She looked small beside the defense attorney, her blazer still slightly too large, her youth impossible to hide. But when she spoke, her voice cut clean through the room. "Your Honor, this case is not about medals. It is not about years of service. It is about one night, one stop, and one choice." Her words carried no tremor, no hesitation. The defense would have you believe that experience excuses misconduct, that if someone wears a uniform long enough, their actions cannot be questioned. But the law does not work that way. Justice does not work that way. She glanced briefly at Kearns, then back to the judge. This case is about accountability. It is about a young man who was pulled from his car, humiliated, and accused without cause. It is about whether the power entrusted to an officer can be abused without consequence. And most importantly, she let the pause hang. The silence drew every eye back to her. It is about whether truth still matters in this courtroom. The gallery, which had snickered at her entrance, now sat still. Even the judge leaned slightly forward, as though reweighing the presence of the young woman before him. Amara didn't raise her voice. She didn't pound the table. She didn't need to. Every word landed like a stone in water, rippling outward. When she returned to her seat, the silence lingered. Sergeant Kearns smirked again, but it wasn't quite as certain this time. He shifted in his chair, straightened his collar, and whispered something to his attorney. And though the trial had only just begun, the room could already feel it. The girl no one took seriously had just placed her first stone on the scale. The bailiff called the first witness, Marcus Lee. A young man stepped hesitantly toward the stand. 17, maybe 18. His shoes were scuffed, his posture guarded, like he was carrying a weight no one else could see. The courtroom's fluorescent lights caught on the thin chain around his neck, the kind kids wear more for courage than for fashion. He raised his hand, swore the oath, and lowered himself into the chair. His eyes flickered nervously toward the gallery, then to the judge, then finally landed on Amara. She gave him the smallest nod. It wasn't loud encouragement, but it was steadying. Amara stepped forward, her notes untouched. She didn't need them. Marcus, she began, her tone steady but gentle. Can you tell the court what happened the night of June 14th? He cleared his throat, voice rough at first. I was driving home. It was around 9:30. I just left my cousin's place. I wasn't speeding, wasn't swerving. He stopped, swallowed hard. I just wanted to get home. What happened next? Amara asked. He shifted. The lights came on behind me, red and blue. I pulled over. And then a man came up, Sergeant Kearns. His jaw tensed at the name. He told me to get out of the car. I asked what I did wrong, but he just kept saying, out, now. Did you comply? Yes. I stepped out slow, kept my hands where he could see them. My mom always told me, don't make sudden moves. His voice cracked on the word, Mom. I was scared. What happened after you stepped out of the car? Marcus rubbed his palms on his jeans. He pushed me up against it, started patting me down, told me I fit the description of someone. I asked who, but he never answered. Did he find anything illegal on you? Marcus shook his head. Nothing, 'cause I didn't have nothing. And how did the stop end? He hesitated. He laughed, said, lucky break this time, boy. Then let me go. But people had gathered. Neighbors came outside. Everyone saw. I never felt so small. The room shifted. Some jurors looked down at their laps, others at Marcus with tight jaws. Even the judge's brow furrowed. The defense attorney stood, buttoning his jacket. His tone carried that practiced politeness lawyers used when they wanted to sound patient, even while sharpening knives. Mr. Lee, he said, you say you were doing nothing wrong, yet Sergeant Kearns believed otherwise. Could it be that you failed to signal? Or that your vehicle had a defect you didn't notice? No, sir. My car was fine. I checked it the next day. The attorney paced slowly. You claim the sergeant pushed you. Is it possible he merely guided you for safety reasons during the pat-down? Marcus's brow furrowed. No, he shoved me, hard. The attorney tilted his head, feigning sympathy. You're 17, correct? Yes. 17-year-old boys sometimes exaggerate. Emotions run high. Isn't it possible your fear colored your memory? Marcus sat straighter, finding strength. Fear don't change what happened. The gallery murmured. The attorney raised a hand. No further questions. He sat, lips pursed. Amara rose calmly, letting a few beats of silence pass before she spoke. Marcus, she said softly, why are you here today? His eyes shone. Because it wasn't right, because he thought he could do that to me, and nobody would care. Did you exaggerate your story? No, ma'am. I just told what happened. Amara nodded, then turned to the judge. No further questions. As Marcus stepped down, his shoulders a little less burdened than before, Amara knew the foundation was set. She hadn't won the case yet, but she had given the courtroom something Sergeant Kearns couldn't laugh away. A human face, a human voice, and a truth that rang clear. The bailiff called the name. Sergeant Daniel Kearns. The decorated officer rose with practiced ease. His navy suit looked tailored, medals pinned to his chest from years of commendations. His stride was steady, confident. To the gallery, he seemed like the picture of authority the man sworn to protect. He swore the oath smoothly, without hesitation, then sat. The chair seemed almost built for him. a throne in miniature. The defense attorney approached, smiling warmly as though speaking to a trusted colleague. Sergeant Kearns, could you please tell the court about your service record? Kearns nodded. I've been with the department 23 years. I've worked narcotics, traffic, community outreach. I've trained younger officers. I've received commendations for bravery, including saving a family during a house fire. A murmur of respect rippled through the gallery. And on the night of June 14th, what brought your attention to Mr. Lee's vehicle? I observed a car that matched the description of a suspect's vehicle from an earlier report. Dark sedan, young male driver. I initiated a stop to investigate. Describe your interaction. Kearns folded his hands. Standard procedure. I asked him to step out. He seemed nervous, avoided eye contact. For officer safety, I conducted a pat-down. No force beyond what was necessary. Once I confirmed there was no threat, I released him. The defense attorney nodded approvingly. Did you act within your training and the department's policy? Absolutely. Did you at any point intend to harass or demean Mr. Lee? Of course not. My duty is to protect the community, nothing more. The attorney smiled at the jury as if the matter was already closed. No further questions. Amara stood. The courtroom shifted with her, an almost imperceptible tightening, as though everyone sensed the balance about to shift. She approached the stand slowly, stopping just short of Kearns' space. Sergeant, she began evenly, you say you stopped Marcus Lee's vehicle because it matched a suspect description. Is that correct? Yes. Can you provide the exact description you received that night? Kearns paused. It was a dark-colored sedan, male driver, late teens or early 20s. Amara tilted her head. So to clarify, in this city on a Friday night, you pulled over a 17-year-old because his car was dark-colored? Kearns' jaw twitched. It was a reasonable match. Reasonable, Amara repeated, letting the word hang. How many dark sedans do you estimate are on the road in this county? The courtroom chuckled softly. The judge rapped the gavel once. Kearns shifted. I couldn't give a number. No, but you were confident enough to pull one over. His attorney stirred, but Kearns raised a hand as if to handle it. I made a judgment call. That's what officers do. Amara leaned in, voice steady but sharp. A judgment call that involved pushing a 17-year-old against a car, searching him without clear cause, and calling him. She flipped a page in her binder, though she didn't need to. Boy, the gallery froze. Kearns' eyes narrowed. I don't recall saying that. Amara's gaze didn't waver. Do you deny it? I said no such thing. Amara took a step back, then turned toward the bench. Your Honor, with permission, I'd like to enter into evidence the video recorded by a bystander that night. Gasps rippled. The defense attorney jumped to his feet. Objection! Foundation! But the judge raised a hand. We'll allow it. Proceed. On the courtroom screen, shaky phone footage lit up. The scene unfolded. Flashing lights, Marcus pressed against the car, Kearns' voice booming. And then clear as day, lucky break this time, boy. The sound echoed in the chamber. Some jurors flinched. Others looked directly at Kearns, whose face flushed crimson. Amara let the silence do the work. She didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Finally, she asked softly, almost a whisper. Is that your voice, Sergeant? Kearns shifted. It appears to be. Thank you. No further questions. The jury wasn't just listening anymore. They were watching, studying, measuring every word that left the sergeant's lips against the young woman who stood unshaken before him. And for the first time in years, perhaps decades, Sergeant Kearns looked less like an untouchable officer and more like a man who had finally been caught. The video's final frame faded from the screen. The courtroom was silent, not the restless hush of impatience, but the kind of silence that came when a room had just witnessed something it could not unsee. Sergeant Kearns shifted in his chair, his confidence cracking just enough for the gallery to notice. He tugged once at his collar, then folded his hands tightly in his lap. Amara didn't sit down. She wasn't finished. "Your Honor," she said, her tone calm but precise. "With permission, I'd like to introduce Exhibit 14, the department's official protocol on traffic stops and searches." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Amara handed copies to the clerk, who passed them to the jury. She waited until each juror had the packet in hand before speaking again. "Sergeant, please turn to page 7. Kearns flipped reluctantly. "Can you read Section 4, subsection B?" He cleared his throat. "Officers must have specific, articulable suspicion of a crime before initiating a physical search of a subject." Amara clasped her hands behind her back. "Did you have specific, articulable suspicion that Marcus Lee had committed a crime?" "I had reason to believe his vehicle matched the description." "That's not what I asked. Did you have suspicion of him, Marcus Lee, beyond the fact that he was driving a dark sedan?" Kearns hesitated. No, Amara repeated. "Yet you initiated a physical search." The jurors glanced at each other, some shaking their heads. Amara wasn't finished. She lifted another folder. "Exhibit 21, citizen complaints filed against Sergeant Kearns over the last 5 years." The defense attorney leapt to his feet. "Objection! Relevance!" "Overruled," the judge said. "The court will hear it." Amara spread the papers out on the evidence table. 5 separate complaints, Your Honor, each one involving a young black male alleging harassment or unnecessary force during routine stops. None of these cases made it to court until now. The gallery stirred. A few gasps broke the air. She turned back to Kearns. "Sergeant, do you recall these complaints?" He stiffened. "Anyone can file a complaint. That doesn't mean they have merit. Do you deny the interactions took place?" His jaw flexed. "No." Amara let the admission linger in the air like smoke. She stepped closer, her voice unwavering. "You've told this court you acted responsibly. You've told us you followed procedure, but the evidence shows you violated department policy, conducted an unlawful search, and used a racially charged term on a minor. And this is not the first time you've been accused of such behavior." Kearns opened his mouth, but no words came. Amara didn't flinch. She held his gaze and turned deliberately to the jury. "This is not about tarnishing a career. It's about protecting citizens. If an officer with 23 years of service believes he can ignore policy, ignore truth, and walk away without consequence, then what does justice even mean?" The silence after her words was deafening. Even the judge sat straighter, his gavel forgotten in his hand. For the first time, Sergeant Kearns looked small in that chair. Not the decorated officer. Not the untouchable veteran, just a man cornered by the weight of his own actions. And the courtroom knew it. The air in the courtroom was heavy, like the moment before a summer storm breaks. Sergeant Kearns sat rigid, his jaw locked, his eyes darting between the jury and his attorney. The once smug confidence was gone, replaced with something raw, fear. His attorney rose quickly, adjusting his tie with more force than necessary. He knew what the jurors had just seen. He needed to redirect their eyes, fast. "Ladies and gentlemen," the attorney began, his tone firm but almost pleading, "you have just witnessed a selective portrayal, a shaky cell phone video taken out of context, a young man's testimony, colored by fear, and my client, a decorated officer, being grilled for doing the job he has sworn to do for 23 years. He turned toward the jury, his hands spread wide. "Ask yourselves, do you want officers second-guessing their every move, hesitant to protect you, because they fear their words or actions will be twisted against them?" A few jurors leaned back, uncertain. He pressed forward. "Sergeant Kearns isn't perfect, no officer is. But to claim that a single word caught on a phone negates decades of service, that's not justice. That's vengeance disguised as justice." He returned to the defense table, shoulders squared, though sweat glistened faintly at his temples. Amara rose slowly, deliberately. She didn't rush, she let the silence breathe, let the jurors feel the weight of the choice before them. Counsel asks you to see this as vengeance, to overlook the facts because of years on a resume. She walked to the jury box, her voice steady. Experience should be a shield of accountability, not an excuse for misconduct. We hold doctors accountable when they harm patients, even after decades in practice. We hold teachers accountable when they violate their duty to students. Why should the badge of all professions be exempt from the same standard? She glanced at Kearns, then back at the jurors. You heard Marcus Lee. You saw the video. You read the policy. None of that is selective portrayal. It is truth. And truth does not weaken with time served. Truth does not bend to medals or commendations. Truth stands. Her words landed with the precision of arrows. The gallery sat frozen. Even the court reporter's fingers slowed, as if afraid to break the moment. One juror, a middle-aged woman in a navy dress, pursed her lips and nodded faintly. Another, a young man with glasses, scribbled furiously on his notepad, his pen pressing deep into the paper. A third leaned back in his chair, arms folded, but his eyes stayed on Amara, not the sergeant. The shift was visible, small but undeniable. The defense attorney tried to stand again, to object, but the judge raised a hand. Enough. We've heard both sides. We will proceed. It wasn't just procedural, it was final, a signal to the jury that the showmanship was over. What mattered now was evidence, and evidence wasn't on the sergeant's side. Kearns sat stiffly, sweat glistening at his hairline. He no longer looked like a man testifying. He looked like a man unraveling. And the jurors could see it. For the first time, the tide had turned visibly, irreversibly. The courtroom wasn't leaning toward the sergeant anymore. They were leaning toward the girl no one had taken seriously. And though the trial wasn't finished, the outcome felt as if it had already begun writing itself. The judge's gavel tapped lightly. We will now hear closing arguments. The gallery sat forward, a collective breath drawn. This was it, the last chance for both sides to carve their truth into the jurors' minds. The defense attorney stood first. His smile was faint, almost forced now, but his voice still carried that courtroom polish. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, he began, I ask you to remember what this case is truly about. It is not about a single word captured on a shaky video. It is not about assumptions or perceptions. It is about whether we allow good officers to be condemned for doing their jobs. He paced slowly, hands folded behind his back. My client, Sergeant Daniel Kearns, has served this city faithfully for 23 years. He has put his life on the line for people he never met. He has run toward danger when others fled. And on the night in question, he acted within the bounds of his duty. He paused, letting his words echo. Was it perfect? No, but perfection is not the standard. Reasonableness is. And when you weigh decades of service against one moment taken out of context, I trust you will see the truth. The truth is that Sergeant Kearns is not guilty of misconduct. He is guilty only of doing his job in a world quick to judge. He returned to his seat with a subtle exhale, his shoulders heavy. Amara rose. The room seemed to shift with her, as though even the walls leaned in. She carried no notes, no papers, only her voice. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, the defense asks you to weigh decades of service against one night. But that one night is not an isolated mistake. It is part of a pattern of abuse hidden under a badge, a pattern Marcus Lee lived through and survived to tell. Her tone sharpened. Service does not erase misconduct. Medals do not erase truth. The badge does not erase responsibility. We cannot call it doing a job when the job is done unjustly. She stepped closer to the jury box, her eyes meeting each juror one by one. You saw the video. You heard the words. Boy, that was not the language of protection. That was the language of power used to belittle. You read the policies. They were broken. You saw the complaints. They were ignored. Ask yourselves, how many Marcus Lees walked away unseen, unheard, disbelieved before this night? Her voice dropped to a quiet intensity. This trial is not about vengeance. It is about accountability. It is about telling every young black man in this city that their dignity matters. It is about telling every officer that power is not a shield from truth. And it is about telling Marcus Lee and countless others that the system still hears them. She took a final step back, her voice steady but resonant. Justice is not given, it is demanded. And tonight it demands that you hold Sergeant Kearns accountable. She nodded once, firmly, and sat down. The gallery was silent, every heart caught in the weight of her words. A juror in the back dabbed at her eyes. Another stared hard at Kearns, his expression unreadable but intense. The judge's gavel struck once. The jury will now deliberate. And with that, the courtroom exhaled a long, slow breath after the storm. The heavy oak doors of the jury room shut with a low, echoing thud. The sound reverberated through the nearly silent courtroom, sealing 12 strangers inside with the power to decide everything. For the first time all day, the gallery murmured whispers threading through the benches like restless winds. Reporters scribbled in notebooks, some slipping out to file updates. A bailiff called for order, but even he couldn't mask the tension that hung thick as smoke. Amara gathered her files, sliding them neatly into a leather case. Her hands were steady, but her heartbeat wasn't. She knew she had done everything she could. Still, juries were unpredictable. Logic didn't always win. Sometimes fear or bias did. She exhaled slowly and glanced at Marcus. He sat at the plaintiff's table, shoulders rounded, eyes fixed on the table in front of him. His mother leaned close, whispering something that made his lip twitch upward, just barely, a mother's way of holding him together when the system had nearly broken him. Across the aisle, Sergeant Kearns sat stone-faced. His lawyer muttered in low tones, no doubt rehearsing strategies for appeals if the worst came. Kearns gave no reaction, but his jaw was rigid, his fist pressed tight against his thighs beneath the table. For once, the confidence that had dripped from him all trial seemed brittle. The jury didn't return quickly. Hours stretched. The courthouse cafeteria buzzed with speculation. Some swore the delay meant a hung jury. Others whispered it was a sign of serious debate. Inside the waiting area, Amara paced near the windows, her mind replaying every word she had spoken, every question she had asked. Her mentor, a graying attorney who had sat quietly in the gallery throughout, stopped beside her. "You did everything you could," he said quietly. "Now you trust the work." She gave a tight nod, but her eyes stayed fixed on the horizon outside, where the Texas sun bled into an orange dusk. Back in the courtroom, the spectators' energy shifted with each passing hour. Some grew restless, scrolling phones, whispering theories. Others sat locked in solemn stillness, unwilling to miss the moment the doors opened again. At one point, Marcus leaned toward Amara. "What if they don't believe me?" His voice was low, but the tremor in it was unmistakable. Amara met his gaze. "They heard you. More than that, they felt you." "That matters." He nodded, though doubt lingered in his eyes. Just as night began to fall, the buzzer rang. A bailiff's voice cut through the quiet. "The jury has reached a verdict." The murmurs erupted, then died in an instant as the judge entered. Everyone scrambled back into seats. The oak doors opened. The jurors filed in, their faces unreadable, a single folded slip of paper clutched in the foreperson's hand. The entire room held its breath. The judge's voice was steady, but it carried the gravity of the moment. "Members of the jury, have you reached a unanimous verdict?" The foreperson rose. "We have, Your Honor." The foreperson rose, a woman in her 50s, glasses perched low on her nose, her expression carved from stone. In her hand was the folded slip of paper that held more weight than all the arguments spoken in the trial. Every eye tracked her as she stepped forward. Even her footsteps seemed louder than normal, echoing in the hushed chamber. She extended the slip toward the bailiff, who took it carefully, as though the paper itself might shatter. The bailiff crossed the courtroom and delivered it to the judge. The judge unfolded it slowly, his face unreadable. He scanned the words once, twice. Then he gave a small nod, as though fixing the words firmly into his mind. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he said, his voice deliberate, We will now hear your verdict. Amara sat still, her hands folded on the table, her gaze locked on the foreperson. Inside, her stomach coiled tight, but her outward composure was steel. She knew that in this moment, strength wasn't just for her, it was for Marcus, for his family, for everyone watching who had ever been told their truth didn't matter. Marcus leaned forward, elbows on his knees, fists pressed together. His mother's hand was on his back, steady, anchoring. His breath came in short bursts. Across the aisle, Sergeant Kearns shifted in his seat for the first time in hours. His lawyer whispered something quick and sharp, but Kearns's eyes never left the foreperson. His lips pressed into a thin line as though he could will the words to bend in his favor. The gallery sat frozen, notebooks lowered, phones set aside. No one dared to cough or whisper. It was as though the entire room had forgotten how to breathe. The judge folded the paper again and handed it back to the bailiff. The bailiff delivered it to the foreperson, who opened it once more. Her voice was steady, but the silence made it sound like thunder. In the case of Marcus Lee versus Sergeant Daniel Kearns, she paused, scanning the words, her lips tightening before she continued. The entire room leaned forward as one. We, the jury, find... The foreperson's voice cut through the silence, clear and unwavering. We, the jury, find the defendant, Sergeant Daniel Kearns, liable. The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. The courtroom erupted in a collective gasp. Marcus's head dropped forward, his hands covering his face. His mother wrapped her arms around him, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Years of fear, humiliation, and disbelief dissolved in that single word. Relief didn't come in a flood. It came like a crack in a dam, slow but unstoppable. Amara sat still for a beat, letting the words settle, her jaw firm, her breath steady. Then she allowed herself the faintest exhale, almost a smile not of triumph, but of justice fulfilled. Across the aisle, Sergeant Kearns' face flushed crimson. His lawyer leaned in quickly, whispering about appeals. But Kearns's stare was fixed on the jury box, a glare that carried both disbelief and a wounded pride. For the first time in years, his authority hadn't been enough. His badge hadn't protected him. His word hadn't silenced the truth. The gallery broke into murmurs, some celebratory, others stunned, a few disbelieving. The bailiff barked for order, but the hum of reaction wouldn't be contained. The judge struck his gavel sharply. Order! This court will come to order. The murmurs quieted, though tension still buzzed like electricity. The jury has found in favor of the plaintiff, Marcus Lee, the judge continued. Damages will be determined in accordance with the law. Sergeant Kearns, you are hereby held liable for misconduct. Another gavel strike. Court is adjourned. As the courtroom emptied, Marcus turned to Amara. His eyes glistened with gratitude, his voice raw. Thank you for believing me. Amara shook her head gently. You did the hardest part. You told your truth. Behind them, the gallery buzzed with conversations that would spill into headlines and living rooms across the city. For some, it was a long overdue reckoning. For others, it was a shocking crack in the shield of authority. But for Marcus and for every young man who had felt invisible, it was proof that silence didn't have to be the end of the story. By the next morning, the courthouse steps had become a media storm. Reporters swarmed the plaza, microphones thrust forward, cameras flashing, headlines blared across TV screens and phones. Teen attorney wins landmark case against veteran officer. Courtroom stunner, jury sides with Marcus Lee in misconduct trial. Young black woman shakes the system. Clips of Amara standing firm, cross-examining Sergeant Kearns, replayed on national broadcasts. Social media feeds lit up with her name. To some, she was a hero. To others, a disruptor. But to everyone, she was undeniable. Marcus stood before the cameras, his mother at his side. He didn't give a fiery speech. He didn't need to. I just wanted to be heard, he said simply. For a long time, I thought people like me didn't matter in rooms like that. Yesterday proved we do. His words rippled through communities across Texas and beyond. They were shared, replayed, and remembered, not for their eloquence, but for their honesty. Meanwhile, Sergeant Kearns's career unraveled quickly. The department placed him on immediate suspension. Old complaints resurfaced, now given fresh attention. Public trust in him, once untouchable, collapsed overnight. Some defended him, claiming the system had turned on one of its own. But for many, his verdict symbolized something larger. The idea that even the most decorated could no longer hide behind a badge. Amara didn't seek the spotlight, but it found her anyway. Invitations poured in, interviews, speaking engagements, offers from prestigious firms. She accepted few, choosing instead to walk through her neighborhood, where neighbors stopped her on the street. "You made us proud. My son watched you. He believes he can do it too. You gave us hope." Each voice reminded her that this victory was more than legal. It was cultural, spiritual. It was proof of possibility. Weeks later, Amara stood outside the same courthouse, alone this time. She stared up at the columns, the windows that had once felt intimidating. She thought of Marcus, of his trembling voice on the stand. She thought of the jurors who had chosen to listen. She thought of every young person who would walk into a courtroom after her, carrying not just their truth, but her example. Justice wasn't finished. It never would be. But this case was a step, and sometimes a single step, could shake the ground beneath an entire system. She whispered to herself, not as a declaration, but as a vow. This is only the beginning. And with that, Amara walked away from the courthouse, not in sneakers too big for her frame, but in shoes that carried her firmly into history. The courthouse that once buzzed with reporters now stood quiet, its steps empty under a pale Texas morning. But the echoes of that trial hadn't faded. They had only grown louder, traveling beyond the city, beyond the state, into conversations that reshaped dinner tables and council chambers alike. Inside a modest community center a few miles away, Amara sat on a folding chair surrounded by young students. They leaned forward, notebooks open, eyes wide. She wasn't lecturing about law. She was telling them about courage, about preparation, about what it meant to stand in rooms where no one expected you to belong and prove that you did. One girl raised her hand timidly. "Do you ever get scared?" Amara smiled. "Every single time. But fear isn't the enemy. Silence is." The girl wrote the words down slowly, as if engraving them into her memory. Marcus, too, was finding his footing. With the settlement money awarded after the trial, he enrolled in college, the first in his family to do so. He studied criminal justice, not to chase vengeance, but to understand the system that had nearly broken him. At a small scholarship dinner, he stood at the podium and spoke to donors and community leaders. "I used to think the system only worked against people like me," he admitted. "Now I know it can be changed, and I want to be part of that change." His voice didn't tremble this time. It carried across the hall, steady and sure. "And what of Sergeant Kearns?" He left the force quietly, his resignation buried in the back pages of the local paper. The man who once carried himself with untouchable pride now kept to himself, his name spoken in hushed tones at the precincts he once commanded. Some said he planned to write a book to set the record straight. Others said he was still fighting appeals. But the truth was simpler. His reign of unchecked power had ended, and no appeal could change that. The case became more than a headline. Law schools studied it, civil rights organizations cited it, families shared it with their children as proof that the system, flawed though it was, could still bend toward justice when pressed hard enough. For many, Amara wasn't just a young attorney. She was a mirror showing what could happen when the underestimated refused to stay quiet. One evening, long after the noise had faded, Amara returned to her grandmother's porch, the same place where years earlier she had sat dreaming of making a difference. She watched the sun sink low, painting the sky in fire and gold. Her phone buzzed with emails, invitations, opportunities. She silenced it and closed her eyes. The trial had changed her life, but more importantly, it had changed others. That, she realized, was the true measure of legacy. Not what you gain, but what you give. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. Child, one day you'll walk into rooms they said weren't built for you, and you'll make them yours. Amara smiled softly. The prophecy had come true. She stood, dusted off her jeans, and stepped down from the porch. The world ahead was still uneven, still full of battles, but she walked toward it unafraid, carrying with her the weight of history and the light of possibility. Because Amara's story wasn't just about one case. It was about every case to come, every voice waiting to be heard, every door waiting to be opened. And as she walked into the dusk, one truth remained undeniable. The underestimated are often the ones who change the world.